between Mr. Henry and Mr. Mason were the main anti-federalists down in Virginia who had the most influence. I tried to speak reason to everyone else, and we finally got it ratified on June the 25th, 4 days after New Hampshire did. And I rushed back up to New York and continued writing the Federalist essays with Mr. Hamilton until July the 26th. New York was number 11. Now, I know it's a bit biased, and you here are from New England largely, and Boston specifically, but as I say sometimes, do not separate text from historical perspective. Let me start that again, I got a catch in my throat. Do not separate text from historical background. If you do, you will have subverted and perverted the Constitution, which can only end in a distorted, bastardized version of illegitimate government. So with that in mind, and you consider and might conciliate and agree at least to a point that Virginia and New York were the most powerful states, why would it be that we had to work so hard to get them to agree to ratify the Constitution? Well, of course, the answer is because they already had quite a bit of power. And for strong states, that means relinquishing some of that power to a centralized government, which might take some of that power away, whereas some of the smaller states, and I won't include Massachusetts because Boston is such a big port and you have a rather large population, Connecticut, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Delaware, the others aren't going to be, they're going to be rather more happy to ratify the Constitution where a centralized government could elevate their state a bit more than one that Virginia or New York thought the same body might suppress. So in fact, it became an issue that even though the Constitution was officially ratified at number 9 with New Hampshire, if New York and Virginia did not ratify, we still might not be able to proceed without crumbling away after 20 years, as Mr. Washington had predicted. So it was very, very important that it get ratified in Virginia and New York. And the Federalist essays were simply a campaign in the newspapers to convince a very anti-Federalist governor and others to ratify the Constitution. I can say with some confidence that I think it would have been easier to convince Patrick Henry than Governor George Clinton to ratify the Constitution. He had such a hold on New York as a whole. It is an agricultural state, you see. There were pockets that were very favorable to ratification, but much of the state was not. And by a close vote, Virginia's vote was very close as well, it did get ratified. What time did we go to? 3:50. Perfect. It's 3:40. So as not to bore you much longer, that's the gist of the whole thing. I suppose I'd entertain questions if you have them. There's no sense going on and on and on and having people nodding off and on and on. So far, I don't see that happening. Isn't your name Mr. Madison?
I was curious. I know that, of course, George Mason, having written the Virginia list of rights, which you then participated in, you became very close to George Mason at that point, with the writing of those bills. And I know that he came to the federal convention being very positively influenced. And during the convention, he changed his mind on the value of a centralized government. And so I wanted to ask you about your relationships with George Mason at that point in time, because you had started off, well, you were so close to Patrick Henry also at the very beginning. I've read some of your correspondence, so I'm curious about your future relations and how it came to pass with Mr. Mason.
Did you hear Mr. Madison's question? Which I fear he could answer himself. Well, it came as it did with many other people. He's inquiring about Mr. Mason and Mr. Henry. You know, in my youth, I was an ardent patriot. Although I didn't use this muscle very much, I did use this one. And I was very much excited about Patrick Henry being our governor in Virginia, and Mr. Mason being quite a bit older than I am. I revered him as intelligent and one of our best delegates. But it boiled down to a lack of Bill of Rights. Because Virginia had a Bill of Rights, it was so very important to Mr. Mason to have rights for individuals. So he stood upon that stance. There were 42 men at the convention to sign the Constitution. Mr. Mason did not sign the Constitution. Here's another irony. Our delegation was 5 men from Virginia. And because Mr. Edmund Randolph at the time was our governor, and myself being such a poor orator, I decided that a more oratorial man should deliver the Virginia, what became the Virginia plan, what our plan was. And he did not sign the Constitution on that day, September the 17th either. Ironically, so there are so many ironies, but the lack of Bill of Rights is the main key answer to your question. Yes, sir.
So I finally get to ask